UTXO. UTXO is unspent transaction output. Unspent transaction output stands for the unspent output from Bitcoin transactions. Each Bitcoin transaction begins with coins used to balance the ledger. UTXOs are processed continuously and are responsible for beginning and ending each transaction. So you can see here we have a transaction out here. Okay, this is, let's say, person red R and this is person blue. So now what happens? He is having 45 bitcoins. He has to send 35.5 bitcoins to B. So now what happens? He can't send it directly the whole thing because it has to be divided. So what happens in this UTXO model? He sends all this 45 Bitcoin tokens into the transactions and he writes in the transaction that 35.5 Bitcoins should be given to B and the rest 9.5 Bitcoins should be given to R back. So it's basically that you are breaking the transaction. You are having a total of 45 Bitcoins. You have to give it 35.5 to person B. So you transfer 35.5 to B and the rest to your account back. So this is how the unspent transaction output works. This is the unspent transaction output input, or you can call it as UTXO input. And this is the UTXO output, these two. And the total input of transaction must include the total output of the transaction. This is very important. The whole point of this is that the total input UTXO should equal to total output UTXO. So in this case 45 and 35.5 plus 9.5, again 45. So to check if a transaction is valid or not, you have to first check that the input UTXO is equal to the output UTXO or not. Okay, if we have a situation in which you are sending 45 into the transaction, but you are giving this person, let's say 40 and 9.5 back to yourself. So what this means that 4.5 bitcoins have generated from, like, out of nowhere it has got generated in this transaction. So this transaction will fail the validation. So this is how transactions are validated. Even you can verify double spending. So how can we do double spending check out here? Is that for this R is sending 45 into the transaction as input, and this transaction, if the transaction gives 45 to B and also 45 to R, so this is what is double spending, that he is sending to B also and he is sending to himself also. So in this case, the double spending thing, how we can check that it will become total 90. So the output will become total 90 and the input is 45. That means 45 bitcoins came out from nowhere. So this is how double spending can be validated and the transaction will get rejected. And also, the mining of new coins is possible only by this. So what happens? There is a transaction 0, or the like the transaction having index 0, in which the miner puts his incentive or the reward he gets from mining, he puts that into this transaction. So this first thing has no input as the miner is working on it. So the coins will be mined. So this has no input, and next it will be having a output to the miner of about 12.5 Bitcoin, which is like an incentive to the miner for mining this block, like the whole block in which all the transactions are coupled. So this can be transaction 1, then there will be more transactions. So all the transactions gathered in the mining pool. Now what happens? This miner will take some of these transactions, put it into the block, and then he will put the transaction index 0, the first transaction, by his name. It will have no input, but the output will be the miner's address, and the incentive is as stated by the Bitcoin protocol, and he will put it there. So now there is only one transaction which doesn't have an input but an output, so it is known as the coin based transaction, or in which the coins are mined. So this transaction, only the 0th transaction, will be validated by the next miner. The miner of the next block will validate this. So he'll check that the miner 1 hasn't taken more than what is specified. Like he might have a transaction of 14 bitcoins. So that is not possible. The next miner will validate it, that if he has taken more than 12.5 bitcoins or not. So this is how the mining can be done. This transaction 0 is known as coin-based transaction. Double spending can be checked, and also input and output outputs are checked for this thing, validation. Account balance is checked by going through a user's all previous UTXOs. So this UTXO is basically how much the account has right now, or how much the person R has now in his account. So if you want to validate that this person is doing some illegal stuff or something like that, so you can go back and check all his UTXOs. Right now his UTXO is 9.5. Before that it was 45. So you can go through and verify all the UTXOs and check if it is correct or not. So this was UTXO.